Our movie today begins in the year 2015, and we see together Dr. Jones Lear and Dr. Tim Vantage, and they are on their way to an exploratory trip to the Bolivian highlands, and we understand that they came to look for a man who is 250 years old, and they think that he can help them with their new medical invention, and the Ministry of Defense is interested in the whole trip and funds them with a very good amount of money and all this, so that they can control diseases and get quick results. They take with them on their journey a representative from the Ministry of Defense named Clark, a local guide, and a full security team for protection. They walk in the forest for more than 3 days to reach the cave that is located under the valley. They quickly enter and find the old man they came for. They are shocked that he is locked in a cage that looks very strange. One of them tries to open the door of the cage and makes a very great effort to do so. None of them understands what is happening to him or who is on it. They see a little boy holding a bucket full of blood, and when they try to talk to him, he runs away from them out of fear. The boy speaks in Spanish and says a word that means vampire, and they all sense that something wrong is happening and they get very worried. Suddenly, the vampire comes out of the cage and starts attacking them, and they escape from his control, and none of them can help them. Clark finds wooden sticks, takes them, and hits the vampire in the heart with them. Unfortunately, it's too late, and Tim's condition is very bad. After that, we see Jones sitting in the hospital thinking about everything that happened to them. He is shocked when he finds Tim coming out of the hospital, and his health is very good, as if nothing happened to him. He explains to him that his health is even better than before. He feels at that moment that they found what they were looking for and that there might be a serum in his body to treat all difficult diseases. Jones is very happy and feels that what he did was not in vain and that he will finally achieve success. Whoever is looking at him after a while realizes that Tim is bleeding and his teeth suddenly fall out, and we understand that everything that happened was because they are doing the well-known NOAA project, and we know that it is a very secret project and the government is funding it, and scientists are trying to do many experiments on Tim's blood. They find a virus inside that can cure all serious diseases, and at the same time, if used incorrectly, it could wipe out the entire human race. They use an old prison to conduct their research and tests. 3 years pass on this project, and the government sends 2 federal agents, Brad and Dale, to Huntsville State Prison for a special mission, and they try to convince one of the prisoners sentenced to death named Anthony Carter to agree to join their experiments and enter the secret project, and we learn that he was sentenced to death for killing his lover, and they promise that if Helgo accepts the sentence against him, he will be free forever. At first he refuses again. When he thinks about what they said, he has to agree because he has no other hope of getting out of there. We return to the secret lab, where Dr. Nicole, the scientist, is speaking with all the officials in the lab. She requests an urgent meeting and begins to explain the danger of the bird flu outbreak that has spread in China, assuring them that it will soon spread worldwide and that no one will be able to control the situation. She thinks that this is the best opportunity for their lab to prove its efficiency and the tremendous effort that has been made for years, and she asked them to start making the vaccine and have it ready as soon as possible, but Jones has a different opinion and tells them that the matter will take a great deal of effort from them and is not as easy as she thinks. So one of the scientists speaks and tells them that he has a very good idea, but it is not. Independent and needing a risk from them, he takes them to the role where they imprison patients and quickly summarizes all the experiments that have been done on them up until now. We know that Tim became known as Agent Zero since he was the first one on whom the experiments began, and he was 52 years old at the time. As soon as he became a vampire, and with time he began to transform into a monster, and his actions became very difficult, and he also touches the blood of anyone who gets close to him. However, his body remained immune to all diseases and epidemics, and after that, their organization began to bring people sentenced to death so that they could take advantage of their situation and agree to conduct these experiments on them. They actually injected them with full blood to see what would happen in their body. Anyone who received the injection from them actually had a very good health and became immune, and after a while he would also turn into a vampire. And the line, failure and pure to them, the last patient who arrived at the lab is Shona, and he sees that she is the one who gave the best result among them, and it indicates that she stayed for 28 full days in good health until she turned into a vampire, and the strange thing is that she is also the only one who still retained her human form after the transformation, and Daniel explains to them that the modifications that deal with their blood serum are not the only factor, and that age makes a big difference because the serum attacks the nerve cells, and since young people have a larger amount, they develop more and more. He tells them that they found someone who is 25 years old, and this is the youngest person that the experiment will work on. He will arrive at the lab tomorrow and tell them that he needs a child to volunteer because this is the person who will be most able to interact with you. The combination will bring the result they are looking for, and of course they are all shocked by the idea because they will risk a child's life. Then the scene moves to another place and we get to know a little girl named my mother, whose mother died a few days ago due to an overdose of drugs. Unfortunately, she no longer has anyone who cares about her or listens to her. This of course makes her the most suitable person for these tests. At this time, Brad and Doy take the 2 tests to get to the lab as they agreed. Anthony enters Noah's project and is very excited. Clark welcomes him and they understand that he used to work with Brad in the army in the past. Clark gives them a folder that contains all the information about my mother and tells them this is their new target and she needs to come here as soon as possible. A few hours later, the 2 of them arrive at the shelter where Amy lives. Brad tells her that her mother died from a toxic substance and that she needs to come with them for a checkup to ensure her health. It becomes clear that Amy is a very smart girl and senses that something is wrong with what they are saying. She decides to escape, goes into the room, gathers her things, and quickly jumps out of the window. Brad notices and runs after her, trying to catch her by all means. After a while, he returns with her and treats her violently, and he doesn't care that she is a little girl. He gets in the car, takes them to the fridge, and leaves the neighborhood as quickly as possible. He throws the fridge aside and hits Dool and blames him for hitting the little girl and threatens him not to come near her again. He calms her down and asks her to drink from him. We go back to the Mukhtar again. Lawrence, the janitor, talks to Jones and tells him that he and all the employees who work here have very bad nightmares. Of course, Jones takes his words with indifference and does not focus on them at all. On the same day, at night, Clark visits his fiancée Nicole and talks to her about the project for a while. Meanwhile, Brad continues on his way to the lab to deliver their emails and stops in the middle of the road to get something for them to eat. So he takes my mother and goes out with her for a while and brings her whatever she wants, and he loves her very much and feels that she is a nice girl, and it is very difficult for him. And suddenly his ex-wife Layla calls me, and we know that they left each other after their daughter died in a big accident, and this is how we understand why he is so attached to my mother, because she reminds him of her and he thinks about how he will hand her over to the strangers. He knows very well what will happen to her there, and he talks to himself a lot until he finally decides that he must save her life and runs away with her far away and takes Dool and takes him to the bathroom and beats him until he faints, and then quickly leaves and takes my mother and asks her to walk with him, and he will explain to her everything that is happening later, and he steals a car from the parking lot and drives with it in the direction of... After a few hours, he takes her to a very distant lake and remains silent for a while until the girl starts talking about her mother and crying and tells him that she misses her very much and does not know how she will live after her. The news reaches the lab and Clark sends him to look for her everywhere and bring the girl back since he is the one who understands her mind the most. At that time, he begins. Anthony is on his journey and sees a lot of terrifying hallucinations. He sees Tim standing in front of him, telling him that he will suffer much more in the coming days, which makes him even more afraid. By coincidence, Brad learns that his picture has spread across all the news channels and that the government is looking for him, accusing him of kidnapping a little girl. This is, of course, a very serious charge against him. He goes to talk to Layla on the phone in the street and tells her everything that has happened to him in detail. He is shocked when he finds out that Clark is with her. Layla tries to hide everything from Clark so he doesn't sense anything wrong. She calmly explains to Brad that she doesn't know how to talk. Brad reassures her that he still loves her to this day and quickly hangs up. When he gets back to the car, he notices that the town mayor is very close to him, and he feels that he has to turn himself in instead of causing trouble with Amy. He tells her that everyone needs to know her story, and then no one will be able to hurt her at all. So he takes her and goes into the station to start the procedures. Suddenly he feels that something is wrong and realizes that they have made a deal with the lab and that he will hand the girl over to them himself. So he thinks of a way to escape from the station without anyone noticing. He waits for the right moment and asks Amy to go get the key so he can free his hands. He manages to do all of this at the last moment because Clark arrives with his men and Brad is forced to steal a gun and threaten the mayor. Unfortunately, to escape, he ends up killing 3 police officers who had nothing to do with anything. Brad manages to confront Clark because he was a special forces officer and has extraordinary skills. In the end, he faces Clark but doesn't want to shoot at his closest friend, so he explodes a fire extinguisher just to distract Clark and manages to escape without hurting him. He goes outside, steals a police car, and saves himself. Amy is shocked at that moment because she discovers that Brad has been shot in the body and she tells him that he is bleeding profusely and he insists on continuing on his way for her, and when he reaches the highway he hits the police car and gets into another car, and with time he starts to feel tired from the amount of bleeding and he stops on his side and faints. At the same time, Clark turns the world upside down and orders his men to monitor Layla's mobile phone. Unfortunately, my mother makes a mistake and calls her and tells her about Barad's situation. Layla tries to tell her some things to help her and stop the bleeding. She is able to wake him up and let him talk to Layla. And because he knows that they are definitely watching her, he quickly throws the mobile phone away, gets rid of it, and changes his route. Jones completes his tests on Anthony, injects him with blood serum, and implants a chip in his neck. At this time, Brad takes Amy to an old house in the middle of the forest. Brad inspects the area well before entering the house, and a large 6-man, armed with a weapon, finds him in front of him. And they threaten him, but as soon as she sees my mother with him, she starts to calm down and stops pretending to be shy again. In the end, she finds out that she knew Brad a long time ago and that she was his manager in the Navy. She blames him for not working on this project in the first place because they are doing completely inhumane experiments. She is forced to help him and they agree to hide with her. Meanwhile, Clark searches for him in all the areas he might have visited. The next morning, he actually arrives at his location and hears Brad killing them outside. He asks Layla to take care of Amy and goes to prepare his weapon. He and AC go out. Clark and his men confront him and he also kills a large number of them. Clark is determined to catch him by any means. At that moment, Lacey gets injured because of them, so Brad has to surrender himself, hoping to give Amy a chance to escape with Layla through the back door. He is shocked when he finds out that she has come out to surrender herself to protect him. He insists on going with her wherever they take her, and he gets into an armored vehicle with her as they are transported to the lab. On the way, he remembers the day he first met Shona and how he saved her. One of the men who wanted to attack her, and from that moment on they became very close to each other and they meet almost every day. In addition, he is the one who convinced her to join these tests and promised her that she would not be harmed at all and that these were all just simple things. He takes Brad and my mother to the lab and separates them from each other. Nicole sits and talks to Amy and explains to her that she could be the hope that millions of people would prefer to live like her. Amy is convinced by her words and agrees on the condition that Brad stays by her side and no one ever hurts him. After a few minutes, Clark talks to Brad and explains to him everything that will happen. He understands from Nicole that the epidemic has spread throughout the world and they must find a vaccine for it and they must not waste time. When he learns that Amy agrees, he begins to calm down and agrees to cooperate with them. He goes in to check on her and finds that they have put up a contract. He tries to reassure her that he will stay with her and that everything will be over soon. After a few hours, Nicole comes in and checks my mother with the serum. He feels that she is being treated at the same moment. When they finish, they ask her to sleep and rest until morning. Brad wakes up and finds the worker standing in front of him. He tries to warn them that Tim will come at any moment and will chase Amy and that he will not spare her. Before he can understand more from him, the guards come and they move away. He sees Anthony by chance since he lives in the room next to them and confirms to him that he really sees very bad nightmares. He is terrified all night and Brad is even more surprised and decides to find out who Tim is talking to him about. With time, he is able to enter the ground floor without anyone noticing and he sees all the people who have transformed after the human tests. He knows that they have all turned into monsters and he gets very upset because he is the one who brought them from prison himself and delivered them to the lab. Before he sees Tim, Jones enters and shows that he is not worried about him at all and starts telling him everything that happened from the beginning. When he finishes with him, he returns to the lab again before anyone notices and tries to sleep a little, and he also sees the same strange nightmares. Tim clearly tells him that he needs to stay out of his way. Over time, Anthony's condition starts to deteriorate and he shows signs of transformation. Jones notices that Tim's brain has become active after a while. It's very long and it tires Anthony even more and they transfer him to the clinic. Nicole sees that he urgently needs to be injected with a new serum. At the same time, Paulson, Clark's assistant, is talking to him saying that he's starting to lose his mind and no one is paying him any attention. That same day, he grabs a weapon and goes out to shoot at the camera station. He blows them all up for no apparent reason, and because of that, the electricity goes out in the entire lab. Clark tries to solve this problem quickly because the doctors need all the equipment that is there, and in order to save Anthony from death, Bart intervenes in the conversation and tells them that he can help them. He asks them to give him water and Anthony falls into a coma and no one understands what is happening to him at all. He sees many hallucinations while he is sleeping and another Tim appears in front of him and tells him that he wants to build an army of vampires and have a family together. He sees that they must control all the doctors and take revenge on those who did this to them. He convinces him to surrender his body so that he can turn into a vampire completely and they can be... He is like him and tells him that this is the best solution for him and Brad takes him to the roof and tries to talk to Paulson and the young man confesses at that moment that he stole a bottle of Tim's blood a while ago and hid it for the emergency room and that if anyone was killed and he wouldn't know them, they would never get to its location. So Brad tells him that he also objects to the project and doesn't want to continue with it, and the young man starts spitting at him and decides to tell him all the information that could help him, and unfortunately Clark arrives at that moment and finishes him off, and after a few hours, Clark Harba returns again and the doctors try to save Anthony's life, but unfortunately it is too late and Tim is able to control his subconscious and dominate him. He also reveals that he did not kill his lover and that she committed suicide, and no one believed him at all. He convinces Tim that he can take his rights from all the people who wronged him and promises him to help him and stay with him, and he agrees. Anthony follows through with his plan and starts to wake up after fully transforming. He attacks the doctor with him and drains all her blood. When John tries to help her, Nicole takes him and escapes to a room, locking the door behind them. The big shock is that John has already been tainted by his blood and will transform too. And that's where our film ends today. Stay tuned for more videos and summaries. Goodbye.